Hi everyone, it's Lisa. Since you have already had an opportunity to look at Nathan's portfolio in class, I thought I would use Nathan's portfolio as a framework around which to give you some more information about Assignment 1, the Student Assessment Portfolio. Here we go. Just as a reminder, this film is going to be walking you through the process of completing Assignment 1, the Student Assessment Portfolio, but you also have access to detailed guidelines and a rubric, both of which are available on our Camino site. So in this film, you'll be seeing the work of two different learners. Nathan was a pre-K student in a public school, and Deborah, who was an undergraduate in one of my teacher preparation classes in Texas. And Nathan was Deborah's focus student in an assignment that required the same tools as this one. And I'm pointing this out because both Nathan and Deborah were at the very beginning of their education, Nathan in pre-K and Deborah at the start of her pre-service preparation course sequence. So let's try to be as respectful of their effort and as we can, and stay focused on what they can do rather than on their shortcomings. So to get started on the assignment, you have already watched the fun size films. You're welcome to review them as many times as necessary to polish up your skills. And most of you have already found a focus student. So what comes next is observing the focus student very thoughtfully, looking for things that seem notable and important. I encourage you to be prepared to use all the tools at any given time. You never know what's going to pop up. And at the very outset, you should start by documenting as many potentially interesting things as you can find, because at this point in time, you don't know much about the student, and you want to make sure that you are not missing anything important. So document a lot at first. You won't know if something is significant or typical for the student until you see it multiple times or you see it in different contexts. Also, don't worry about missing something great, like, oh, I can't believe I didn't have my camera to take pictures of that. If something is really a strength of a student, you'll see it again and again and again. And if it's a growth area, you'll notice it again and again and again. My last tip is come up with some way to keep your documentation organized and confidential. And of course, it's always okay to share your documentation with the classroom teacher with whom you're working. Your goal is to learn things about your focus student that would be valuable to you. You need to make sure that the understanding that you're developing is accurate and will help you be more effective. But at the same time, I encourage you to keep an open mind as you observe and document. Don't jump to conclusions. And even if you've gathered data on something, but you find out it's not really something that is significant for the student, you just walk away from it. Put it in a different part of your file, and you may go back to it later, you may not. It's just not a big deal. Okay, we're about to get involved with Nathan's data. Deborah had only been in Nathan's classroom for about 3 weeks at the time she was gathering these data, and it was only for 2 mornings a week. So she didn't know Nathan very well and had not had the opportunity to observe him much before this assignment. And Nathan and his classmates were in a public pre-K program in a Texas school district that was available to students who were living in low-income communities or who spoke a language other than English at home. And the important thing to know about Nathan's prior experience is that for him and most of his classmates, this was their first exposure to real school. So the learning documents that we have about Nathan are 2 reflective notes, 2 anecdotal observations, a documented conversation, 3 work samples and cover sheets, and 4 short videos. And I'm hoping that I'll be able to get the videos to play in this film, but if I can't, you'll be able to find them and view them on our Camino site in the Class 3 folder. Learning about a student is what this assignment is all about. And so what I would like you to do is to examine all of the documentation that we have about Nathan in an effort to identify his strengths and growth areas, both in the cognitive academic domain and in the social emotional domain, and then to think about what your next steps would be for each strength and growth area that would enable Nathan to continue to strengthen his skills. So I'm going to let you read through the documentation and go at your own pace, stop the film when you need to, and I'll be back with you along the way. So far, you have only had access to information about Nathan that was presented by Deborah, his teacher. And everything that you have learned about him has come through her eyes and her perceptions. So it's information of a certain kind. And take a minute to think about the strengths and the growth areas you might be thinking about for Nathan, and what you're wondering about, what you still want to see, what you still want to find out. We're going to move on to look at a documented conversation, and then to work samples, and then film. On this slide, Deborah is providing some background information to contextualize the conversation that will be appearing on the next page. So take some time to read this background info and then continue with the film. Just to clarify, D is Deborah and N is Nathan in this conversation. Remember, you can always pause the movie if you want to stop and read through any of the documentation more slowly. So Deborah already provided the student's name, the date, the activity that was going on, and the text of their interaction. And now she's doing the final part of a documented conversation, which is to explain what that documented conversation reveals about Nathan. This is Deborah's opinion. Your opinion about what this reveals about Nathan could be very different. So take some time to read it and then go on to the next adventure with Nathan. Did that documented conversation give you new information that may have changed your thoughts about Nathan and his capabilities? Or did that documented conversation confirm what you were already thinking? You may also still have a lot of questions. And so think about the kinds of assessment data that you might want to gather to answer your questions. On to work samples. This work sample was actually taken while Nathan and Deborah were having that conversation about grapes. So you can see his work, and you can also read her cover sheet and see how she interpreted his work. Here you've got another work sample. This is Nathan's journal entry, and you can see what Deborah had to say about that on her cover sheet. This is the third work sample. It's a matching worksheet, and yeah, here it is. So take a look at Nathan's work and take a look at the cover sheet, and as you are interpreting these work samples, you might be changing your understanding of Nathan as a learner, his strengths, his needs, and so on. The work samples that you saw are actually double dipped or double documented in these films. So you will see Nathan working on the matching sheet. You will see him coloring the grapes and see him doing some writing activities. So if the learning videos play in the film, that'll be awesome. But if not, you know where to find them. Okay, here is the first learning video coming right up. This is Nathan working on a matching worksheet.
You don't know what this is?
Whoops, no it's not. There we go. This is Nathan.
What's this one? I think that one. Ready? You draw a line. Can you show me? Right? What looks the same as apple? And this guy. Yeah, draw a line.
Alright, let's do it today.
Draw apple to the apple. Apple to the apple. Where's apple? Yes. What do you do?
So there you have it. Take a look at the cover sheet and move on whenever you're ready. All right, here is the next learning video, the dog story. Here we go.
I know work.
Do you not tell me more about your dog?
Yeah. Work.
No.
Where did you see your dog?
Yeah.
Where did you see them?
In the store.
Which store?
Okay.
Oh no.
Hey, Michael. What kind of, let me see this shirt.
Right now he's only getting...
All right, take a look at the cover sheet, and then you can move on to the next little video. Okay, welcome to the learning video about the letter S. Here we go.
Yeah. What letter is that, Nathan? The one you just changed. What letter is that? You don't know? Okay.
A fish.
It's a fish? Okay.
You look at me.
I'm just playing with the camera. So what's this one, Nathan? What's this one? A baby one? Okay, thank you, Nathan.
I do it.
An S? That one's an S? Okay, thank you.
All right, so take a look at the cover sheet and move on to the final video whenever you're ready. Okay, last learning video for Nathan. This is called Nest.
What else did you? What else do you need that you tree? Some leaves. Right? Want to draw some leaves?
A tree. I'll make a tree.
Okay, so take a look at the cover sheet and move on when you are ready to restart. So, your next steps would be to look carefully at the data that's been gathered and see if you can identify one of Nathan's cognitive or academic strengths, one of his cognitive or academic growth areas, one of his social and emotional strengths, one of Nathan's social and emotional growth areas. Then go back through the data that you've gathered, the assessment data, and look to see if you can find 2 pieces of evidence that will document each strength and each growth area. You might not have all the necessary documentation at this point, but once you have identified the strengths and growth areas, you'll know what you're looking for, and that can inform the data gathering you do going forward. Once you have identified, go away. Okay, once you've identified the strengths and areas for growth, you know that you can complete your summary table. 2 pieces of evidence to support each strength, and 2 pieces of evidence to support each growth area. And then the final thing that you need to do is think hard about the data that you gathered and try to determine what your next steps might be. It doesn't even really, in Nathan's case, it might not have to be an instructional plan. It could be something that has more to do with perhaps a screening of some sort, activities to strengthen his fine motor skills, whatever. And so based on his strengths, how are you going to build and improve his strengths? And based on his areas for growth or his needs, what activities or opportunities will you provide Nathan to ensure that he keeps on moving forward and making progress? Now, it's possible that you might not have all of the evidence that you need. Sometimes that happens. But once you have your strengths and areas for growth identified, you can continue by gathering more data to fill in the blanks or the empty spaces. So, once you know your strengths and growth areas for your focus student, you can observe and document strategically. And what I mean by that is try to look for circumstances in which your focus student is demonstrating their strengths or demonstrating their growth areas, and try to capture what they're doing. Do what you can to get the strongest documentation possible of each strength and each growth area. And one thing that's really important is to choose tools that are appropriate for the skills you're documenting. So, for example, in Nathan's case, he speaks in a way that is difficult to understand and interpret. So if you want to continue to document his limitations in oral language, taking a photograph of Nathan would not be a good idea. Taking a video of Nathan is a very good idea. And there are tools that work in all areas, specifically reflective notes, documented conversations, and anecdotal observations, because those are things that are teacher-driven. But other tools, work samples, learning photos, and learning videos have to be tailored to the circumstance. So at this point, you would go out and, well, you wouldn't go out, you would go forth and try to gather data that will support the case that you're trying to make about your focus student. Once you've got the data that you need, you can complete your summary table. And if you've developed different ideas or have data that suggests something slightly different, you can go ahead and redo your summary table. That's no big deal. And then you will write your response letter. And there are explicit guidelines. Why do I keep doing that? Explicit guidelines available on Camino to help you with that. Next, you will be submitting your student assessment portfolio. You will submit the summary table, the documents, the cover sheets, the response letter, all of those things. And I'm not sure yet how we're going to be collecting them because I would like to do it in a way that enables you to put up all of your documentation somewhere and then be able to continue to just add to your documentation file online so that you won't have to redo everything when you move on to assignment 2 and when you work on your parent conference. So Alicia and I will give you information about exactly how to submit your portfolio very shortly. After Alicia and I grade the portfolios, you'll receive specific feedback about your use of the tools, your interpretation of the data that you gathered, and especially important, what you need to do to strengthen your portfolio for assignment 2 to make it a stronger and more compelling case of your students' development and capabilities. The assignment rubric is available on our course Camino page, and the same rubric is used for assignment 1 and assignment 2 because assignment 2 is just a refinement of assignment 1. All right, got some tips for you. You just looked at and interpreted data that was handpicked and carefully curated by Deborah, my former student. So she did all the hard work of observing and documenting Nathan's learning and capabilities. She identified strengths and growth areas. All of that hard work was done, and what you saw was a portfolio that was designed to tell a particular story about Nathan. This was a story that Deborah developed based on looking at all of the documentation that she gathered, identifying strengths and weaknesses, and so on. Assignment 1 that you are doing is harder than the work that we did as we went through Nathan's portfolio because you have to start from scratch. You have to do the hard work of observing and documenting and then theorizing about what the strengths and growth areas might be and then continuing to look and so on. So I would really like to encourage you not to underestimate the time or the effort it will take to complete assignment 1. But I will tell you that the better your assignment 1 is, the easier time you'll have with assignment 2 and assignment 3. Finally, a couple more tips. Many of you, those of you who are in your clinical practice placements, you already know your focus student fairly well in all likelihood. So I want you to be careful. You may already have assumptions about what that child can do and what that child struggles with. But those assumptions could be wrong because you are not systematically and strategically observing and documenting the student's learning. You were working with the student at a level of awareness and professional engagement that was lower than the one that you're at right now. So it's possible that your assumptions are wrong, and being careful with your documentation and interpreting it thoroughly and reflecting on what you've learned may help you learn new things about your focus student and in fact may change your thinking about your focus student. And I would encourage you and everyone in the class to use this student assessment portfolio as an opportunity to deepen your knowledge of the focus student, and you'll be able to see yourself becoming a more effective teacher for him or her. So I hope this was helpful, and you know that I am always available to answer your questions and support your work. You can email me or call me on my cell phone. Bye, everybody.